All right, welcome everybody. Oh, look, everybody's just showing up. It's so much fun. All right, for all of our people who are here and who are showing up, here's what we're about today. Welcome, welcome. We are here to explore and experience rapid decision making in the wild, and then find some ways to tame that beast, because that is tricky stuff. Now we have found, so we have these groups are completely open, completely optional, which means we have folks who show up and they said, oh my gosh, it was 90 minutes. I didn't mean to stay for 90 minutes, and they leave at 60. Or people who show up and said, oh my gosh, that wasn't what I expected it to be, and they leave before the 60. So because this community is a learning community, I'm going to pop a link in right this very minute, which is to our feedback form. So I would encourage you to go ahead and open that now. In the event that you need to leave before I ask you to do this again at the end, go ahead and let us know what happened. What did you learn? What did you think? What can we learn from what you learned? So with that, and as our friends start to join us, I want to turn this over to our special guest today. Today we are being led by Thomas Lantler. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, perfect.
Sweet. And Anissa Ghoshi from Crisis Compass. So they have fabulous expertise to bring to bear from their work in crisis situations, and they're going to lead us through that today. So with that, it's all over to you.
Thank you very much, Elise, for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. I'm going to take the lead first before I hand over to Anissa to say a few words. Thank you very much for joining. It's a pleasure to meet all of you, and look forward to spend the next hour and a half with you talking about the topic that is very, very dear to us and very important to the work that we've been doing and that we also continue to do. A few words about myself. I'm Thomas. I have worked for the past 15, 16 years, primarily in humanitarian crisis response. I've led crisis teams in different disaster contexts, so situations that you might see on the news. That's what different organizations that I worked with have responded to. And this is also a little bit the context that we'll be taking you into today, just as a heads up. Now I'm one of the two partners of the Crisis Compass, and we're trying to transfer lessons from the humanitarian world into other crisis situations and also the business world, and do a lot of training and skill development. Now over to Anissa, who is in a nicer place than me. I'm a bit outside Oslo in Norway. It's also cold, dark, and gray here, but Anissa sits in a way nicer place than me.
Hi everyone, I'm Anissa. Thank you for that, Thomas. I am usually in London, where it's, I'll just start with that, where it's usually rainy and cold, but at the moment I'm in the south of Morocco. So merhaba from Morocco. I also have a background in humanitarian work, primarily working with displaced communities in many different settings, but I also have worked in healthcare during the COVID crisis, and I've worked in the legal sector, in immigration, and also in management consulting. So looking at working with various different organizations, with various different sized businesses as well, with various relationship management, and looking at crisis obviously from different, and tackling it from different points of view. And that's me, very briefly.
Thank you. And you will get to know each other in the groups. So given that we have just 90 minutes and some of you might have to leave early, we'll jump straight into it. We need your expertise. We're all experts on decision making, despite maybe not having worked in the humanitarian sphere. But the setup today is a little bit from the trainings that we do. So we will give you a little bit of a glimpse on how we prepare future leaders, how we prepare people that work in crisis response for the topic of decision making. It's a short glimpse because it's just 90 minutes. It's usually a way bigger module, but we want to give you an idea. We want to give you a little bit a feel of situations that you could encounter. But the idea is not to discuss too much about the situations, but more about really the decision making in it, because dilemmas, difficult situation we face also in our everyday world. We face also in our normal work life. It doesn't always have to be humanitarian. But this is the context that we'll give you in, just to give you also a glimpse of what we usually work with. You might hear in the background my children. It's the hour before bedtime. So they're usually not very, very cooperative, but I can assure you nobody's being harmed. They're just really tired at the end of the day. So if you hear them, just try to ignore them, and they're safe because their mother is with them. So they're not alone and not neglected. Before we kick off, a few engagement things. You have the chat on the side. Elise said she will keep posting a few things that gives an overview of the session. It's being recorded for those of you who joined a bit later. And if you have questions, just drop them in the chat or raise your hand. We'll try to pick them up along the way. This is a very low-tech setting, so there will not be any links. You will not have to be connected to any other platforms. I will walk you through the process. There's one document at one stage that you will have to have access to, but we'll share with you how that's going to go. The rest is very low tech. The rest is really all about listening to the explanations, hearing the challenge at hand, and then taking decisions. This is what we're going to be doing in the next 90 minutes. Ready? Then I have a first dilemma. This is actually a real dilemma that happened in our work previously. It's a very quick explanation of the situation, and then I would like you to just give me an indication by raising your hand what you would do. So I'll give the situation is the following. In a hospital, in a field hospital, in a disaster zone, this is what I used to work with. We had these hospitals built up which provided healthcare for people affected by disasters. We had a situation one day where 2 doctors were in the hospital. They were alternating shifts. It was a very small hospital. And we had a patient there that all of a sudden started to really deteriorate in his condition. And he needed surgery. And we had 2 surgeons. One that was on shift turned out to have a fever of 38.5 degrees Celsius. So that was already really elevated temperature. The operation was scheduled to be going on for a couple of hours. The other one, who was not on shift, had actually taken the liberty to have a beer. So my question to you is, who, if any, would you let operate? You are the team leader of these 2. So you basically, you're the team leader. So if you would let operate the one with the fever, please type a 1 in the chat. If you let the other one operate, please type a 2. And if you have another idea, please type a 3 into the chat. I see already 2s, many 2s. 3, need more info. 1s. Good. I see. Could I just have a couple of comments? Maybe someone who typed in, there were most of you were 2s. Would just someone share how you got to this decision? Just a couple of ideas. Very important before you answer, there's no right or wrong here, right? It's very important in humanitarian and generally in dilemma decision making, right and wrong must be eliminated because none of the options is a good one, right? So this is not, you're not wrong, whatever you typed in. It's just how you got to this decision. That's interesting. Anybody who would like to share how you got to this decision? Anyone who typed in 2?
Looks like Carolyn and Nancy both have their hands up.
Yep. I don't know who was first.
I don't either. I'm sorry. I was just going to say quickly, you said 1 beer. Now, I don't know how big this person is, but 1 beer versus an elevated fever for a couple of hour operation. I figured the person who had the beer could eat something and during the operation, the person with the fever could get worse. So that was my thinking.
Okay.
I had a similar concern, not necessarily about the deterioration of the surgeon, but that he could pose an infection risk. I know that, and I'm not sure about the impairment of the person with the 1 beer. Hard to assess with we have 1 surgeon, 1 beer. That's challenging.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing. Anyone who typed in 1? So there's the person with the slight fever. If you'd like to share how you got to that.
Louis, I don't know, but when I saw that most of people put 2, I thought that I had to try 1. just to not to jump in group bias. And the second idea is that the second one is not on duty, so I think it's why should I make a decision with somebody who should not operate, because he could have had operation for 24 hours on the go. So even though he's drinking some beer, he could be totally exhausted. So my recommendation would be to ask the first one to intervene.
I picked one. My thinking was it felt like a more knowable risk, and it being more knowable, you could manage it better than not the person on duty who had been drinking. I don't know what that looks like right now, but I know how to manage someone having a fever. That was kind of my thinking.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And anyone who typed 3? I saw there's a couple of comments, need more info, would really like another idea. Just your thoughts quickly. Rabia, you have your hand up if I see correctly.
Yes, along the same lines that have been shared, people have different metabolic rates for alcohol. So a beer could impair some people and not others. Fever also, or an elevated temperature. Sorry, I don't know the centigrade, but some people run an elevated temperature as a baseline. There have been people, if this is a COVID concern, who have no other symptoms. The person is who needs the surgery is at risk of dying. Don't know what kind of surgery it is. If it was like, something that required pinpoint physical dexterity, like an eye surgery, which I don't think it is if this person is dying, but you get my point. I just feel like we need a little bit more information about the individuals and their skill sets and capabilities and what's happening for this person.
Thank you. Louis? Yep.
There's probably a third option, which is to ask the people to make the decision. So talk to each other and make your decision, because probably you are the most capable person to make the choice.
Okay. Scott? Sorry, Tricia was first and then Scott.
I like that, Louis. Thanks for sharing. I guess what was going through my mind was more other options in terms of other trainee, surgeons on site, or other people that could be paired up with, my number 2 guy that's had a bear, or, so just thinking about some other options other than just 1 or 2, but, are there other things to draw on, whether that's partnering them with other people or something like that. Where it's going.
Scott?
Yeah, so I am curious kind of if it is an option to delay. My choice was neither. Don't let either of them do it. Puts the patient at an unnecessary risk. Working as a provider, it's unfathomable to do something like that. So it's definitely neither, but is there something you can do to delay the deterioration at an acceptable rate until maybe the guy that had a beer is out of the window or something like that?
Thank you very much for that. This is ultimately what we decided to do. We decided to let the person at the elevated temperature self-assess if she, in this case, was possible to operate. And she was in the beginning, and the other person was really taking rest, eating, and getting ready to take over at one point. Also not an ideal solution. Yeah, but the point is there is no ideal solution, and you've pointed it out. And this little exercise is basically all to illustrate that now you were individuals taking this decision. And it's already difficult. We are about, how many are we? We're 22 people, and there were lots of different opinions, lots of different considerations, all of which were highly relevant. It's just different angles on the same problem. Now, individually, it's already difficult. And here today, we discuss how this looks in a group setting, because that is a completely different ballgame when you have actually as a group to come up with a decision, not only as an individual, which is already difficult enough. So thank you very much for participating for this. As I said, this is to just give you also our wasn't really a solution, but the choice that we made was that we split this up. A bit more context, of course. You didn't have much context. That contributes to making this decision a lot more difficult. The person wasn't very impaired, but there were legal consequences. There were, of course, reputational consequences for the organization. There were not least the life of the person that was anyway at risk already. Are we actually putting it more at risk? It was a situation that was very, very unfortunate in its constellation. There was also rule breaking involved because alcohol was not really allowed, even in the time off, because it was a field operation. So basically, that was playing into it. But it was a real dilemma situation. Just to give you a glimpse into what things can happen sometimes in the field in humanitarian operations. But I don't want to spend too much time anymore on the individual level, because we're here to discuss groups. And we're now, we're 22, minus the 3 of us, 19. So I suggest we make 3 groups, Elise. I think that's okay.
I have 4 groups. I have 4 groups of 5. Does that work?
Perfect. That works as well. Yeah. You will be given a case now. And before we go into this case, it's not a real case, but it is a realistic scenario. And these are also cases that we present the emerging leaders and even experienced leaders with when we do group decisions, when we do preparation for decision making in the field. It is not such a humanitarian situation now. It's basically, just to give you a quick context, you will be presented with a car crash, and this might be an exercise that you have done in another form. But the idea is, read through the instructions. I will tell you in a second where to find them, and then come up with a decision as a group in the given time. You have 15 minutes time, and then we will join you. So Elise will join a group, Anissa will join a group, and I will join a group, and we will discuss how you got to this decision. But first, you have 15 minutes time. Keep that in the back of your heads. This is not much to come up with the answer and the decision for the situation presented. Before I tell you where to find the situation, do you have any questions? No. Okay. This is a car crash that involves a very difficult decision. So if you feel uncomfortable at any point, leave the room, come out to us. We can go in a separate room. We can discuss it, but you do not have to sit through the exercise if you feel uncomfortable with it. So that's really, that's completely up to you. There's no forcing to do this. If you don't feel comfortable with the exercise, you're free to leave. I think a few people dropped out now. Should we make 3 rooms after all?
Done.
The exercise can be found on the link to this event. It's at the top of the chat. If you see that, maybe we have to repost it. And it's called exercise. It's one of the posts that I put on, and it's called exercise document. And you should be able to access it. Can I just have a quick thumbs up if you're able to access it? Perfect. Then we can open the rooms, and we will also be floating around. So if there's any questions, but basically the information that's on the document, that's what you have available.
All right, folks, go make some tough decisions.
Well, welcome back, everybody. And it's good to see smiling faces. After exercises like this is not always the case. But I said it in my group, and probably also my co-facilitator said it in theirs, but move it a little bit, shake it off, this exercise. We're through with it now. We're basically just sharing the learnings from it. You did hopefully a debrief. If you have any more reactions, let us know, write us a direct chat message, and we can open another room and you can have a bit of a break. I would just, before I give you a little bit of our perspective, I would just simply hear your key learnings that you want to share with the other group. So you might notice we're not talking about who you took, if you took anybody into your cars, because you took this decision and that's what you decided, and that's the decision that you made. So it's not about comparing. It's not necessarily about what is a right and wrong choice, because there is none in this situation, just as in the others. But the important thing was really the process, and we'll talk about why that's the case. So please, I start with my group. Please share your I think it was 3 learnings that you picked up with the others. I don't know who's going to take the word.
I'll share one, and maybe we can each take one. Is that we agreed on our assumptions early on and kept testing and validating them as we went. So we made our assumptions transparent, and we reached agreement on them pretty quickly.
I'll go with the second point. I think we all listened to each other very carefully. There was no one in our group who was saying, look, here's how it should be done. There was a really good model of a shared decision-making. Like in my background's just as a lawyer, but in education as well. And you're always trying to see how groups work and whether they respect other people's opinions and listen carefully to them. So again, there was that transparency, and here's why I'm thinking that this person should go or this person should go back. Everybody listened, and I think we got the best out of, the sum of the group. The outcome of the group, I think, was more than the sum of the parts with it, because of the way we were going about it. I think as a group, we did better than any one of us would likely have done on our own.
Thank you.
With the possible exception of Jeffrey, who one of the things we did was we sought expertise within the group so that somebody could help. We could help create basically a structured way of thinking about this problem, which was a triage problem. And Jeffrey brings some of that background, so is able to say, here's how we might go about it. Here's some practices that people in triage situations use, and we were able to fold that into our line of thinking.
Good. Then I hand over to Anissa's group.
Yes, so group 2. Would you like to share a little bit about your experience? Since when I joined you, no decision had been made just yet. So that was interesting to experience and play with. And Trisha, would you like to kick off, please?
So just to clarify, your question is about our learnings, right? Not about what we decided. Correct.
Just the learnings, yeah.
Yeah, just the learning. Yeah.
So I can't necessarily speak on behalf of the group because we didn't really get into this conversation, but I'll just share one of my learnings. I think one of my learnings is the importance of having a clarity of a process for the decision making. So we were starting to touch on that in the sense of having some decision making criteria. But in terms of the process, I don't think we necessarily established what that was up front. So like we were going to do some criteria, and then we were going to rate people, and then just check on how people felt about that, like vote on how people felt about that or something like that, like whatever the process was. So it felt like having an agreed process would have been helpful. That being said, I also know it's a time where people have to make decisions, and sometimes there isn't, people might feel like spending time agreeing the process for making the decision is a waste of time, right? So I don't know, but that's a reflection that I'm having. Basically.
Very important point. We'll get into that.
If I may, I support what was said by Trisha, but on the top, I would say we decided to designate somebody driving the process, just the conversation, having a leader. 2, we made a decision effectively to work first on the criterion. And once we have sorted the people, we agreed to be solidaire or supportive to the criterion and then the choice, even though for some of the choices, there was not a total agreement. But I think we commit for somewhere, it was a game, but we commit to support the choice that was made by the group, including in the case where the son of the prime minister would die, we would go together to the court and say, we agreed with this choice, even though the prime minister's son died.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much. Yes.
Anyone else in the final thought?
Susan had her hand up.
Yeah, just I think it was tricky. My comment there was a little frustrated. I'm not sure we quite got the balance right between arguing about the process or the criteria or how fast we were, or how slow we were, versus actually making the decision. Mm-hmm. I thought if you looked at our time, I think we spent more than 50% of the time on process and less than 50% of our time on people and criteria. I don't know if the rest of the group feels that. I just felt that. And at the end, I felt like, ooh, I wish we'd thought a bit more about the people than the process. And I know you need to do both, but yeah.
Very, very, very important.
It was very meta. It was a very meta experience, not a very on the activity, but more on the how do we think about the activity.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Those are all crucial learnings, and you will see afterwards in the input that some of this is already there. Some of the things that you applied, and also some of the things that you struggle with. Those are very important things to consider. Thank you very much. Then it's Elise group. I think it was group number 2 or 3. I don't know, but Elise's group anyway.
It's group 3. So, folks, what do you want to highlight as your key learnings?
I think one interesting thing for me, and Carolyn kind of mentioned it with like 45 seconds left, was so I come from the military and the medical field, and something that they kind of feed into you over time is when you get into scenarios where you're like kind of chasing your own tail, you have to like cut off the tail at some point and say, all right, we have 0 seconds left. Let's make a decision. And what she said was like, well, if someone on scene had stepped up and made me feel like they were an expert in the scenario, I probably would have backed off and listened to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found that really, really interesting.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, that's absolutely interesting, an observation. Yeah, thanks, Scott.
I didn't actually have that experience. I think surfacing the criteria was really important for us, and it was where we started to make movement because we all have different kinds of expertise in different parts of the situation. And the work that I do frequently involves people who are very uncomfortable with uncertainty, and sitting in it for even 5 minutes, it's considered almost unbearable to sit in the uncertainty for long enough to surface critical information, even just to get people who might be reluctant to speak up or unsure how to speak up in the face of someone who's extremely assertive on their expertise and uncertainty. So I felt like, surfacing that set of shared criteria really started us moving.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Rabia. Any other comment?
I think what I'm thinking about, from my perspective of the experience is the thinking fast, thinking slow,
Yeah.
I mean, if it's a crisis situation, how fast you want to go, right? And to the other group's points around, expertise and triage, that might be, the other thing to think about in terms of criteria.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. You've covered a lot of things that we'll be talking about now. Welcome, Thomas, as well. You missed a little bit of the first part of the session, but welcome to here for the second. That's very good.
Thanks.
What is the key with this exercise is that, again, there is not really a right or wrong. It depends on the set of criteria, the framework that you apply for it, that you look at it. And you've already said it. It's very different angles and it's very different approaches to it. And what we do, and this wasn't really a humanitarian setting as well, but it's very similar. These are decisions that we also have to make in a triage in a hospital. Who do you give the food first to? I mean, these are all decisions that we have to make, but you can easily transfer that into a business context with maybe less at stake, but with similar dilemmas. What we work with and the field that we fall into is a field that was for many, many years a bit neglected within the decision-making field, and that's natural decision-making, if you've heard of it. Some of you might have heard of the name Gary Klein, who was a bit of a pioneer in that field. Natural decision-making is basically a field within decision-making that looks at or studies decision in their actual contexts. So they're not working with experiment settings in a classroom or anything. They really work with natural decision-making as it is happening. Well, it started all with how make firemen decision. How do they actually come to a conclusion what they do in a situation? How is their decision-making process? It's a lot about, also deals a lot with the topic of intuition, how to deal with the famous gut feeling, what it actually is it even a decision-making process? And so this field looks into that. And the reason why we are fans of that is because it's very difficult to prepare for decisions like the ones that you have just made. There is, of course, the thinking fast and slow. This is kind of I wouldn't say the other decision-making field, but they're not always in alignment on how decisions are being made. But they actually agreed. There was a very interesting article a few years ago between Gary Klein and help me now, the author of Thinking Fast and Slow. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Daniel Kahneman.
Kahneman.
Mhm.
These two basically pioneers of each field have agreed to disagree, and they wrote a common article, "The Beauty of Agreeing to Disagree." And so this field, they keep discussing. It's quite an interesting conversations. But our approach is very experience based. So what I will present you now are really lessons that Anissa and I and others that we work with have learned from decisions in the field, that are takeaways that have worked practically for us. And not all of them are applicable at any time, but they give you a framework, and many of it you will see you have already applied. So these are just 2 quick slides before we do another exercise. Yep, good. Okay. Unfortunately, not all decisions are like the beautiful one, which way to go. But it doesn't matter. It's very important. So we call this operational decision making. What I will present to you are 2 things now. One is a set of what we call guiding principles. Don't have to be principles, they can be pointers, but we call them principles because for us they are very, very applicable in these situations. And the second one is a framework, how you can approach it. That doesn't mean you have to include all the steps at all times, but these are steps to consider along the way. So let's begin. Number 1. We have a tendency to judge our decisions based on the results. And this is a little bit of a flaw in thinking, because as you already pointed out, 1 or 2 teams pointed it out, we do not really know what happens on the other side of the decision. It's all assumptions. And it's tricky to say whether it was a good or a bad decision based on what the result is if you don't know about it. Also, the results are not necessarily something we can influence. So one of the key things when you make decisions is focus on the process and not on the results. Discuss them, but discuss them as assumptions and how you look upon them. But you will also realize you look upon them differently. With different perspectives, that means we have also different assumptions what comes out of a decision. Focusing on the process is therefore important because that's where we can do something. We can decide on how decisions are being made. We can decide on what are the criteria. We can actually reflect. We can get different opinions. There we have a room for maneuver. At the results, we don't. So be careful to judge your decisions based on the results, because that might give a little bit of a skew picture of them. They might have been very good decisions because the process was thorough, but they might have an unintended and unanticipated result. Doesn't make the decision as such bad. It's a minor distinction, but I think it's a very, very crucial one because it puts your focus on a spot where you can actually make changes and learn and improve and really adapt your work. Exchange perspectives. I mean, you've seen now already in the first examples with all different perspectives. The reality that we construct really is constructed from different angles, and those perspectives are incredibly valuable. You will see also in the second exercise why this is important, because perspectives are based on what we hear, how we see things, our own experiences. So it's basically how we perceive the world, and we perceive it very differently. So we might know something that the other one doesn't know, and exchanging the perspective really enlarges our reality, but also expands our option spectrum. This is one of my most important advices. Avoid right or wrong, good or bad. Because in situations like these, and that's true for many decisions, it's equally good or equally bad. There's nothing right or wrong about it, because if you ever make a choice where you have to leave people behind, who knows what's going to happen to them, it will never be a right choice. But it will also never be a wrong choice, because you, on the other hand, save people. So you don't know what's coming out, right? You can assume maybe one discussion was, well, it's a young child that will live longer. We don't know that. But maybe it helps us make a decision, but it doesn't make it right or wrong, and it doesn't make it good or bad. So I really urge you to not talk with these terms. We urge you to talk with terms like confidence. That's why I also asked you, how confident are you in your decisions? And also my co-facilitators did that. Confidence is therefore important because also in 5 years, 10 years, even if the outcome was not what you wanted, you should be able to look back and say, yeah, at that point, we thought this was the decision to take. This was the decision that we were most confident about. And still today, I think that even though the outcome was not at all what we anticipated, we couldn't know. This is where we have to get to, and we have to find ways how we can get confidence in the decisions. Identify assumptions. I think that was already very clearly said. There's not much to add. A lot of our, particularly when it comes to decision making, but also generally how we interact, a lot of our work, a lot of the things we do are based on assumptions. The key skill here is identifying them. Once we've identified our assumptions, we have options. We can choose to go with them. We can choose to find more information. We can actually exchange perspectives to maybe see like, well, how can we get more confirmation, whether this is true or not. But identifying our assumptions is the most tricky thing. And I like to give one example. I, for example, was raised with the very clear instruction by my father that when we sit at the table and have any kind of meal, I'm not allowed to wear a hat. As a teenager, I always had a cap on, and I don't know how many fights I had with my father about that, but he was like, there's no hats allowed at the table. So when I grew up, this became my fundamental assumption, right? When I grew up and explored the world, I had to realize that not everybody had that. And the first time when I sat at the table and there were 2-3 people who had their hats on, I was really uneasy because it was such a fundamentally strong assumption. But that I didn't even think of that as an assumption. I think like that's a rule. That's what we have to have. And very often when we label something as common sense, or when we label something as, even when we talk about the table manners, we have all very different assumptions of how that should be. And identifying those in any kind of situation is a skill that is very, very powerful and very, very important in decision making. And finally, make space for emotions. That can be during or after. After is always before as well, but make space for emotions. It's very important. And don't let that take away the focus from the decision, but it's important to deal with your emotions in a decision-making process, because they can cloud the judgment if we're not aware of them. They can influence our decisions, our choices. They can actually lead us to having more biases that we initially might have had. So if you have emotional reactions, it's important to just make space for them. Don't have to make a lot of space for them, but really acknowledging it. For example, if you're afraid to take a decision as a leader in a crisis, that's something that is so powerful if you acknowledge that to yourself and even maybe to a colleague or to the other colleagues. And I was often afraid of taking decisions. But saying it out loud means like, okay, I've acknowledged it, it's there, now I can move on. If we're not acknowledging emotions, they have a tendency to really come in our way in one or the other way. So make space for emotions is another guiding principle that we really give you as an advice in a very difficult decision-making process. And then before we go to the next exercise, quickly a couple of steps that you could take. And you will realize that you might have done that already in the previous exercise. Agree on the process. And here, time was an issue. Time is very important. Time is a little bit of a tricky thing when it comes to decision. There is the shorter time, and also Scott said that at one point you will have to get in the decision-making process. And what happens usually is you get more focused. But of course, we always want to have more time to deliberate. Now, the challenge with this is that if we take too much time, the decision actually becomes more difficult because we add on a lot of factors that might not have been necessary. Think about buying a car. You have a very clear idea what the car should be, let's say $10,000. It should not be older than 5 years, should not have any damages. The mileage should not be higher than, let's say, 20,000 miles. And you find the car and you say like, okay, I'm going to buy it, but I'm going to sleep on it today. And then you go back home and then you start to Google. And all of a sudden you see a car that's almost the same, but it's 12,000. Or you see a car that has a bit more mileage, but it's the same price, a bit less mileage, but it's the same price. And all of a sudden you make your decision a lot easier while you've already had the choice that you had it out to do. So there you didn't have confidence in your own choice. So really time is a bit of a tricky issue. So finding that balance between agreeing on the process very quickly, but don't underestimate that this is also a decision, and not spending all the time that you have available is important. And something that can help with that is assigning roles. Having someone facilitating the process, for example. Yeah, someone that is actually guiding you through it. That might not necessarily be a person in the end that is part of the decision-making process. I encourage you to actually split these roles. But having that assigned gives you maybe a bit of a structure. You can say like, so we have 10 minutes left. now we have to kind of move on to the decision. If we're all involved, these roles become a bit blurry. Other roles could be special competencies. That was also mentioned. What is my expertise? Can I contribute with something special? Might get a special role with that. So assigning roles could also help. Discuss also the situation context. This is where the different perspectives come in. So how do I perceive what's happening here right now? What is it that I pick up from this situation? This doesn't have to be long, but it's very important because it's a bit zooming out. Where are we? What's happening? What is actually our task? What do we know? What do we not know? Discuss a bit the context. Specify and reframe the problem. And this is arguably the heart piece of a decision-making process. I notice very often that the problem is not formulated in a way that we can do something about it. The pandemic now, I always bring this example, in many countries, or in almost all countries, there were travel restrictions. So if I say as an self-employed person, my problem are the travel restrictions, I can't do anything about this. But this is also not really my problem. If I look closer, it's, well, what is my problem really? My problem is that my business isn't running because I travel usually a lot. And if you reframe it into that I own the problem, it would sound, what can I do to keep my business going despite the travel restrictions? So you see the way that we took from my problem are the travel restrictions to how can I keep running my business? And reframing the problem is so powerful because if you reframe it that it's within your scope of influence, you actually take the driver's seat back. You're not a victim of the context that throws something at you, but you take the driver's seat and say like, so I moved the problem within my scope of influence and now we can start working on it. And generally also in dilemmas, think of a little rule of thumb. Every situation, every solution is a bad one, feels like a bad one, feels like one that shouldn't be good, shouldn't be taken. But that also makes every solution a good one. It's just a reverse logic. They're equally bad, so they're equally good. And it's a lot easier if you actually apply that mindset to say which one feels best than to say which one feels least bad about the ones that I do. Because we have such a negative mindset, and this reframing is very, very powerful. Create your choices. Every problem is presented with two choices. And remember in the beginning, in the first exercise that I gave you, who of the two people would you choose? And there was the third option. Do you want to do something else? Creating your choices can be very powerful. If you look beyond the two options that are presented, there's always maybe a different one, maybe something that we can create. And again, that's retaking the driver's seat. And finally, check your conviction levels. This is very important. How convinced am I? And I asked you also the question, and you might have had this in the other group as well, what would you have needed to become more convinced? And this is really the doubts that you're still having. That's where you're going into, like, what is still that makes me insecure about this? And that's where you can explore what you can do about that to get more convinced and really confident in your decision. And finally, make a decision and then implement it. Because that's when you should have the confidence and you should be able to take that decision. That was it. Very quickly run through, but this is basically a guide. Any thoughts, any questions before we move into the second exercise?
Which is going to be short because we are hitting close on time.
Short, just a short dilemma. Mm-hmm. So, no. Okay, good. Then let's try. We're going into the same groups. Thomas will have to just join a group. This is just going to be a verbal instruction. It's a dilemma situation that I actually experienced a couple of years ago. So I like to bring this up because I'm always curious on what other people would have done. So you have to now picture that you are, so I will only give you this instruction verbally, right? So very important. So you have to now picture that you're part of a so-called advance team that is sent to a context where a large refugee influx is happening. So really thousands of people. And they've settled all over the place. And you're there. Your main task is to identify a location where you can set up your clinic. So this is your task, because they have settled everywhere. So it's tricky to find locations. There's also, it's not easy because there's a lot of water. There was floodings and all that. You're working with a with a partner organization on the ground that you have very good relationship with you're very close and have a very reliable relationship with. And the vice chairman of this partner organization you've never met before. He is very helpful and takes you on a ride in your car. He joins you on a ride because he's very familiar with the area. He used to be a politician in the area, and he knows the sites and he's very well connected. So he said he was going to help you to find sites. So you go on the first trip, and during this trip, he's making some very, very strange comments about. He's basically voicing an admiration for dictators. He's not necessarily talking very positive about the people the refugees that are there. But you dismiss this in the conversation. You come back home, didn't really identify a site, and agreed to go out on the next day again. That evening, you receive a phone call from a person that didn't want to be named by anybody, but it's a person from the partner organization saying, like, we want to just inform you, this vice chairman, he has decided to run again for a high political role. He's using this positioning with the humanitarian response and with your international organization to increase his profile. But I want to inform you that there were very substantial rumors about him running all the drug trade in the area and being involved in human trafficking. So your call is now, because the next day this person stands in front of the door and wants you to join you in the car and take out. And very important information, this is the person that can actually decide whether you get a site or not. This is how well connected he is. So your choice is now, are you going out with the person? You're under very much time pressure because you need the site, or are you not? Are you refusing the offer to take him along? You have, how much time do you want to give, Elise?
8. They've got 8 minutes.
8 minutes. Is the task clear? You can ask me a question if you want. I cannot sure if I can answer it, but if there's any questions.
Could you repeat the question? It's about going with the guy or not. That's it?
Taking the guy in your car, your organization's car.
Okay.
So this is very important for him also, because he wants to position himself. So he's very, very clearly pushing for you coming in a car that has the branding of your organization.
Okay.
All right, good luck.
Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. Still a few smiling faces, not as many, but still, that's good. We have 5 minutes left. So the suggestion I discussed a bit with Elise, what I would suggest now is to hear just the 3 approaches to this, what you decided. I can share my approach. Then Elise has a question in the chat. And for those of you who can stay a little bit longer, we do a quick debrief. A couple of minutes over time. Sorry about that. Group number 1, that was the group I was in previously, around John, Rhonda, Nancy, and Jeffrey, and I think Michael. What did you do in this particular situation?
There we go. Okay. Yeah, I think one of the things that, and again, in a real life situation with this, I think we would know this and be able to get on with it, was take a look at what are the guiding principles of our organization. And if our guiding principles are, we get this clinic in there no matter what, because that's the key thing that we need to do. Once it's in there, then the organization can start to deal with the partners that we have who may be unsavory or other issues that come through. But getting it started is the most important thing. That would really guide the decision. If the decision was, or if the guiding principle of the organization was, under no circumstances do we work with any people organization that deal with human trafficking or the drug trade. That's a no for us. That's a no-go for this organization. Then that would guide us along the way. So not knowing that was part of the problem. One of the things we discussed was, do you have a frank discussion with this person saying, look, we've heard this. You said a couple of things about dictators before, and the danger of that may be that you get shot in the head in the worst case scenario, So Yeah, it was a hard one, I think.
Well, what did you do? Are you gonna go in the car or not?
I think we're going in the car. If we assume that if we knew that about our organization a little bit more, about how they vetted who we're actually talking to and dealing with, and the overriding goal is to get that clinic started, then we would go in the car. Other than that, we don't.
Thank you. Group 2. That was Anissa's group before, if still.
Okay, I can speak for our group. I think we actually sort of agreed with what Rhonda just described, but we had the first choice was to explore a third option, which was to not go in the car, but to go and travel in separate cars or an unbranded car to avoid, to be able to get more information without providing that sort of public endorsement that might come with going in the car. And then our second set of decisions was based on understanding the organization values as well. And if we didn't understand them, we didn't know, like phoning a friend was possible. Could you call someone very senior in the organization to clarify, we're doing this, is this consistent? But we thought that might not be possible. So we thought we would understand the values. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. Group 3.
I think we kind of all felt apparently empowered by our own sense of what was right and wrong, and did not even necessarily consider what the organization's core values might be. So that would have probably been a helpful thing to ponder, as opposed to feeling like lone rangers out in a dangerous situation. Reframing it, trying to reframe it in some way so that we could not have to make these particular decisions was something I was hoping for, but I don't think we ever really made an alternative or a reframe. We were mostly just thinking, you know what, we're not getting in the car, and we might be bold enough to tell him why.
Okay. And all of these are great decisions, and I can share you very, very quickly, if you're interested, what I did. This is a dilemma. The reason I used this is because it followed me for years, and because I keep thinking through the decision-making process and all of it. I got in the car with him, but what I did was I didn't use a car that had the marking of the organization on. I refused that claim, and I also didn't get out of the car in any situation where he tried to promote himself to people that I wasn't seen with him. Because of course I had to be marked with the markings of my organization. So my clothes were very visible, but I didn't want to be seen with him or taking any photos with him. So this was my solution. The reason, my guiding principles, and this is the thing, of course, the organization has very clear guiding principles on this. There's a code of conduct. Almost all organizations have that work in the humanitarian sphere, that clearly says this should not be done. But what I take in consideration in this was that what the information that I got, it was a rumors. So I didn't have any proof that this was actually happening, other than my encounter with him the previous day. And he didn't give any indication of drugs or human trafficking. He was very dismissive of the people, and did voice opinions that were not really the opinions that I wanted to hear, and not really worth the organization he was part of. But I didn't know if these rumors was true. So I said, like, I cannot build the risk of losing a potential site that he can block, that saves thousands of people potentially, on the rumors that I don't know, that somebody could have told me for any reason, right? So this was my consideration. But again, I will not say this was a good one or a bad one. It was just really my consideration. And what I also did, and I think this is the last thing content-wise before we do the debrief, what you sometimes want to consider, if you're the decision maker, or if you have a decision maker in your group that ultimately takes the final decision, that the person is removed from the discussion process and only comes in when the choices are being presented. The reason for that is very simple. If you're in a discussion-making process, you come up with a solution as the decision maker, you're automatically biased. So you will actually, your vision gets a lot narrower. What is actually what is really optional? If you're just presented by your team with, these are the options that we, according to these and these criteria, have identified, you have a way less biased approach to it. You can follow your intuition. You can follow your immediate reactions to it. You can explore, because you weren't part of the discussion process. So it doesn't add biases on to the ones that you already have. This is a small minor addition. Sorry for going over time, Elise and everybody, but I hope it was useful. You want to post your question before we just maybe do a final quick takeaway round or debrief round for those who are still here?
Yeah, I do. So one of the ways to surface a lot of feedback really quickly. So first of all, if you didn't, when we got here, get the feedback link, open it up, let us know. And then the other bit of information I would love for you to answer is the fill in the blank in the chat. So you walked in with some things in your mind, some ideas, something before. There was a before, and now there is a now. What has changed in the last hour and a half? All right, last couple of seconds for anybody who's got typing fingers. And for those of you who are still here, again, we'd love feedback. So
Absolutely.
in addition to your typed things here, anonymous feedback in the chat, and then those are our upcoming events. Radically different. Is Jack the party scientist there on the end of the month will have a very different event for us.
Oh yeah, he's great.
He's something. He's something. It's going to be something. So that'll be fun. So I'd love to see that as well. Love to see you at any of those moments. All right. All yours, Thomas.
Yeah. If you still have a couple of minutes, of course, if you want to share some reflections, please. If you have to run, that's also fine. I'll be still here a bit. But if you have some final reflections on either the last exercise, anything that you sit with still, any questions for me or Anissa. Anissa is the reason why I talked so much, by the way, is because Anissa has a bit of an unstable internet connection. It's usually not the case, but in this case, I took a bit the spotlight. Sorry about that, Anissa.
And I'm very grateful that you did. So I appreciate that.
Any reflections? The floor is open. So, or questions or comments.
I have a question.
Yeah, Scott, please.
For you guys, just what's the best way to like get in touch with you? I think this would be I'd like to do something longer for my organization, and then what's the best way to like talk to you guys? And then obviously it would I'd have to get you in touch with our global learning department and kind of do like a sit down with them to talk through what you guys can do and all that. What's the best way to do that?
The best question ever.
Question ever. I mean, we're on LinkedIn. You can, definitely contact us there, please, if you're there.
Okay.
Otherwise, just drop an email to. I can write it in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can write it in the chat if you wish.
Okay, great. And we can find a time to speak. Definitely. We were just actually discussing with Elise that this is simply the first exercise we did. You could dissect in over half a day, right? The small information that was there, the assumptions, the different contexts that you have to look at. So there's, of course, this is very compact, and thanks for bearing with us on that. But we just wanted to give you a glimpse into how and what can be done. So definitely, if you find this interesting, please reach out.
Yeah, I think it's a great exercise for self-reflection, which is something that we're kind of trying to move a bit more towards with the emotional intelligence. So.
Yeah. And Scott, if you have a contact that you'd like to share with us, that'd be great as well. So, we can say hello impromptu as well.
It'd be me.
Feel free to.
So let me write my email.
Perfect. Right, we've done. Oh, it's hard to say goodbye to people after they left. I said bye. Yeah, we were just talking about the comparative approaches in terms of how they train it, how we train it, and all of the different mix and match ways. It's good fun work. Very cool.
It's interesting to think about this, all these decisions when you're presented as something that's an obvious. There's urgency and importance in the decision. In our day-to-day decisions, it's not always clear that you have a timeline for urgency, really, and the importance of it. Like some of the things you're talking about, like the one we just went through, that was a pretty short timeline to make a decision. That kind of forces you to really think rapidly about it. Like even in our focus sessions, I was thinking like the 8 minutes and the 15-minute times forced us to really get down to brass tacks in a lot of ways.
And this is a crucial point what you say, because this is often an advantage, right? I had for this decision that you had 8 minutes, I had a whole night. And believe me, I did not sleep much, because like I drifted in and out of sleep, right? Because I was really like, okay, I went through all the potential consequences, and probably not even close to what really could have been the potential consequences, but my head started spinning. And that was really the downside of having so much time. If I had less time, if I had an hour or so, I would have been way more to the point what is important for me, really basically that triangle. Here's my organization, here's the context, and here's me. And I have to find me in the decision, because I'm ultimately the decision maker. I could have escalated it, but with communication issues, might have been a delay. But then also, would I have had the ownership? If my boss would have said like, no, you get with him in the car, it would still have been my face everywhere. I would have probably ultimately be the one who had to carry that reputational damage or anything if this turned out to be true. Plus, I had this, I had actually the pressure to find this site, because we were surrounded by suffering. So it was really the time that I had, I wish I had not had, because I think that that is really that got me completely spinning. And this is
Thomas?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I just had a quick question for you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I noticed that for me, those decisions that tend to keep me awake at night is when I'm trying to access a different level of consciousness, because I don't have the information. And usually that's when I'm trying to decide something on my own that really needs somebody else to think through it with. Did you have somebody else to think about it with, or not someone to get direction from, but just to think through?
This is I also do that, by the way. I like to sleep on very difficult problems and then think about it first thing when I wake up. But what I did in this case was I actually just spoke out loud my considerations to my team. So I also had them discuss it. I said like, this is the story. Discuss me what you think. Tell me what you think. And then by listening, what helps me is when I explain my considerations out loud and listen almost to myself talk. It's a little bit, it helps me get clarity. It also helps me very clearly identify where my issues are. Okay, this I'm uncertain of. This I'm actually very sure of. Because it's almost like it helps me air that. It's a bit of a relief. And in these decisions, I hardly ever avoid, as you also said, like I avoid to actually ask for guidance, and I avoid for what would you do? But I ask more like, what is it that you hear? And often it's interesting because people very often mirror back in these difficult decisions that, well, it sounds to me like we've already made a decision. And that is what we often don't realize ourselves, that we might have made a decision, but we have come up with reasons why this is not the one we want to take, rather than saying like, okay, this is the one we take. And this is very interesting. So yeah, definitely find someone to talk about it. Get also guidance if that helps you, but it helps to say it out loud. Yeah.
I think the event we ran last week with Miriam explored a technique for doing exactly that. So she brought people together to look at their imposter issues around facilitation and whatnot, and then present their problem to another person and get advice. So a peer counseling group thing. Write down the advice you were giving another person, and then they turned around and read the advice as if it were advice for your own problem. Because often the advice we are giving others is actually the advice we need to hear, right? So how do you externalize the challenge that you're looking at so that you can pretend it's not your problem, it's somebody else's problem, and put it aside and give that person the advice you need to hear about it.
This is a great technique, and I'm also a huge fan of what we call colleagues coaching, that some of you might be familiar with. But it's really this you state your problem or the decision you have to make, and then you turn around and let the other people discuss what they've heard, what they would do. You're not allowed to clarify. You're not allowed to interfere. You're not allowed to turn around. You're basically just listening to that conversation. And then you turn around and say like, so what is it that you take away? So it's not about correction, or it's because it's simply listening to their debate and filtering out, is there new perspectives, new ideas that can help you look at your things differently. And this is incredibly effective. It's really, really underestimated. Also works nicely online, because you can just switch off your camera so that you're not there, or look away, or, so it also works.
Very cool. I put a link into the recording from the event that Miriam did exactly that. She led the group through exactly those things, if you wanted to check that one out. But very cool.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Sorry for taking a bit too much time, but I hope you found it useful, and please reach out and contact us if you're interested. Thanks for taking the decisions today.
All right.
Super looking forward to your feedback. See you next time, everybody, or whatever time. See you later. Bye.
Thank you.